And away we go. I'm Rabbi Micah Streiffer, and I'm excited to study with all of you today. We're going to explore. I thought I'd throw a little Jewish philosophy at you today. Um, a little bit of Hermann Cohen, who's an early 20th century Jewish philosopher who writes very confusing things, but I think we have a lot to learn. So let me start by sharing my screen. Let's say the blessing for study together. If you would like, you can unmute and we'll join together in this blessing and sanctify this act of study. Baruch atah
Atah Adonai,
Eloheinu melech
Melech
haolam
Ha'olam,
asher
Asher
kitshanu
Kitshanu,
v'tzivanu
V'Shmavtav,
la'asok
Tzivanu,
divrei
La'asok V'Divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Blessed is the Eternal, whose mitzvot, whose commandments make us holy, and who commands us to immerse, to engage in words of Torah. So I've called this session Loving the Stranger, Loving Your Neighbor, and I want to explore what in many ways I think sits at the heart of the Torah. In fact, as many of you know, the literal middle verse of the middle book of the Torah is love your neighbor as yourself. And so we like, as liberal Jews, we like to say loving your neighbor is at the heart of the Torah. But I want to ask, along with this philosopher who I'll talk more about in a moment, the question of how do we learn to love the neighbor? What is the impetus in Judaism or in human life for learning to love your neighbor? And how can we find some hope as people living through difficult times in the potential of human beings to learn how to love your neighbor? So we're going to do some what I like to call good old-fashioned text study here, where we'll just make our way through a text. I hope we can have a conversation, and I would love to hear what you have to say. If you have a thought to share, best thing to do is to raise your hand electronically, which you can do under reactions at the bottom of your screen. Everybody see reactions at the bottom of your screen? Or you can drop a thought into the chat. I'll do my best. It's just me this week, but I'll do my best to monitor what's in the chat and include that in the conversation as well. So we start with the book of Deuteronomy, nowhere near where we are in the Torah right now. Closer to the end, this is closer to the end, and we are closer to the beginning, having only started the Torah a couple of weeks ago. But when we get to Deuteronomy, we learn these words from Moses. Moses is the speaker here, and he's teaching the Israelites about how they should live once they enter the promised land. They're about to cross over. He's been leading them through the wilderness for the last 40 years, and he's not going with them because he's about to die. And so, among many other things, Moses talks for a whole book, but among many other things, he says as follows. Ki Adonai Elohechem hu Elohei ha'Elohim, v'Adonai ha'Adonim. For your God, Adonai, is God supreme and Lord supreme. Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanorah. That might sound familiar to you from the liturgy. The great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who shows no favor and takes no bribe, but upholds the cause of the orphan and the widow, and befriends, or in Hebrew, actually, better word here is loves the stranger, providing food and clothing. Then it says, you too must love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So let's just, put this into our own words, kind of like react. What do you see here? What is the message that the Torah is trying to get across? Is it a simple message? Is it a complex message? What do you suppose the Torah is saying? And why does the Torah say what it says using the words that it uses here? Any thoughts or reactions? I totally stumped the crowd. Oh, I see Bob's hand. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, these groups are all ones that do not have the ability to fend for themselves in ancient society. The orphan has no one to care for him or her. The widow no longer has a man around the house to do the, farming and working in the market and so forth. And then it's interesting that the stranger is in that category. I suppose this is someone who doesn't have a green card yet or a work permit or something like that. And maybe they are allowed into this land, but not free to work.
Hmm. Or at the very least, they may be able to work, but they may not be part of any, they don't have a social network around them. To tie this to this week's Torah portion, when when Abraham is called by God to leave, God says, leave behind your land, the place where you were born, and your father's house. The Hebrew notion of a father's house, Beit Av, literally in Hebrew, that was sort of the social building block of ancient Israel. Um, there was no, social welfare system. There was no social security. There were no food stamps to make it relevant to what's going on today. How were people cared for? They were part of a Beit Av. That is to say, essentially the social unit made up of a man and his wife or wives, their sons and their wives, and often the next generation as well, right? So a multi-generational social structure. When Abraham and Sarah are called, they're not only being told leave behind your family, which is hard enough. They're being told to leave behind their social structure. Anyone who's not in a Beit Av doesn't have access to food, land, farming, social support in various ways. Who's not part of a Beit Av? And this is where I think you're exactly right, Bob. The orphan, the widow, and the stranger, right? These are the vulnerable in society. That's what the Torah is trying to tell us. Doreen, you're up next, please.
In our world today, I was just thinking how some of us like to do everything ourselves. We don't like to ask for help. We don't want anybody messing with us. But yet, you turn on your lights, you have heat, you have food in your cupboard, you have clothing on your back because strangers and people you don't know did their jobs to provide that for you through the system. Now, I, as most of you know, am crippled and I'm in a wheelchair. So I drive and whatnot, but I can't get my big groceries, like if I need bleach or something like that. So I'll save those things up and have them delivered. And the person who delivers to me is a stranger. And I so appreciate that person. And I always tell them, you're my grocery angel today. And so my job is to fill my place in the community, and in the community is wherever God calls me to fill my place. And that as I appreciate other people, strangers or whatever, who do for me, then I can be encouraged to do for others also.
Thanks, Doreen. That's a beautiful message, and so important for us to remember that we are intimately connected with strangers, right? Our lives are what they are because of the work that strangers do. The famous, I don't know how famous it is, the story about the I think it's from Rabbi Seymour Roselle, the little boy who thanks his mother for the sandwich, and she says, "Don't thank me, thank the one that made the sandwich." So he goes to thank the baker, and then the miller, and then the farmer, and then all these people that are involved in making his sandwich. These are strangers. These are people we don't know. And the Torah suggests that we have some kind of a responsibility to think about them, know about them, protect them, right? Because we are, well, for a few reasons. It's interesting. Doreen gives a reason, which is to say we are interconnected. There is no society without without other people, without other strangers. The Torah actually gives two different reasons for caring about the stranger. One is, um, sorry, somebody, there we go. One is God loves the stranger. That's reason number one. If we were outlining this for a class, we would say our argument number one, God loves the stranger, therefore you have to love the stranger. Argument number two, you were strangers, therefore you have to love the stranger. These are two different arguments. One is theological, one is historical or quasi-historical, right? One is about God, one is about us, one is about imitating God's ways in the world. The other one is about the historical experience that leads us to to know certain things and feel certain ways. And I think that the Torah is suggesting here that in some way our way of life, Judaism, hinges on our ability to love the stranger. Aviva and Yehuda, and then I want to turn us to a philosophical text.
Go ahead.
I think it also takes on the whole nature of chosenness. Just up front, it says, God shows no favor and takes no bribe. No favor means you're not special, but actually the blessing is this. The blessing is that everybody's in this, and the realization that everybody's in this. And that blessing is a very sophisticated blessing, because it's not a blessing that a lot of the rest of the world takes on at all. The rest of the world is much more into other. Our society is breaking up right now because of the whole nature of they're not like us. Viva uses the word, they're less human than us. I mean, she definitely always uses that all the time. But we are all humans. We're all here together. And the blessing is this, that everybody's in it, and the realization that everybody's in it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Yehuda. We are living in a world right now where we're seeing the rise of xenophobia, right? We're seeing a rise in anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-foreigner sentiment, right? People booing each other's national anthems. There's all kinds of forms of anti them kind of sentiment rising. And by the way, Jews are not immune from this. We do it as well. You look at what goes on in Israel Palestine. We are also we have this human tendency to feel differently about the other. And so, I think that's some of why this has to be here. Rules don't exist unless people are breaking them. And so, in a sense, this is the Torah's response to that very human tendency. And so I think that's a response to Carolyn's question as well in the chat. Is this only about the vulnerable? No, I think it is about the vulnerable, but I think it's also about the other, right? In all the ways that people can be other. They're not from here. They don't share my values. They're not part of my in-group. As human beings, we need to create in-groups. It's how we feel part of something, but also that can be taken to an extreme that becomes dangerous for society and for us. Jen, go ahead. Are you able to unmute there, Jen? There we go. Oh no, you unmuted and then you remuted.
Got it. I have a personal 11th commandment. In my 11th commandment, if there's a real and cogent need, and I have the ability, and that parenthetically is time, health, money, all the things that could limit me. If I have the ability to help, I'm not permitted to pass and ignore. It's kind of a takeoff. I was a Catholic once, a takeoff on the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. But I really feel strongly about that. We can't walk by and look at the guy and say, well, it's not my problem.
Right. Thanks, Jan. I have a similar thought that I often try to keep in my head, which I got from Jim Collins, the business guru of all places, who says, never stifle a generous impulse. If I'm thinking about giving something to somebody and then I'm like, well, should I not? The answer is always yes. Just don't stifle a generous impulse. I want to turn us, Bruce, go ahead. And then I want to turn us to one more text. Last word on this.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to hold you up. I just was looking at this from a from a point of view of how I'm being told I must love the stranger, for I was a stranger in the land of Egypt. And that requires a certain imaginative leap, a certain a muscle of compassion
Hmm.
that not everybody maybe has or is able to exercise. And in some ways, when you look at today, it seems like there's a failure of imagination and of this muscle, this compassion muscle, where it's not being exercised in the way that would help us understand our relationship to strangers as, we could be you or you could be us. It's a very, very interesting perspective. And the fact that God is taking such care with the strangers and that we want to be seen as godlike or mirroring God's actions, or that there's some sort of divinity within us, means that we too need to take on this responsibility. It's a very complex kind of passage. You had asked before if it's complex or simple. It's a very complex passage with a lot of different themes kind of working, each other.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that, Bruce. I agree. It's funny. It's simple but complex, right? Just be kind. But there's all this psychological complexity to what it means to love someone else, and where does that come from? And I really like what you said about the idea that there's this muscle to exercise. When we exercise our muscles, they get stronger. I don't think it is that people are not capable of. I think it's that we have to practice this. And actually, that's a really good segue into where I wanted to go next. This is from a book called Religion of Reason Out of the Sources of Judaism by Hermann Cohen. Anybody ever read Hermann Cohen? Those of you who are in my classes have heard about Hermann Cohen from time to time. Hermann Cohen is a late 19th, early 20th century Jewish philosopher. Um, he was the chair of philosophy, not Jewish philosophy, but philosophy at the University of Marburg in Germany in pretty much like 1880 to 1907 or something like that. Those were his years there. It was very unusual for a Jewish person to be in an academic chair at that time. And Cohen was, outside of his Jewish thinking, he is known for having developed what's called the Marburg School of Neo-Kantianism. He was a follower of Kant and developed a very important strain of Neo-Kantian thinking. And out of that, Cohen also developed his own Jewish philosophy, which is especially written down and codified in this book, Religion of Reason Out of the Sources of Judaism, which was published in 1919 after he died. I think he died in 1918. It was published posthumously. And Cohen is here dealing with this exact question. How do we come to a place where we are able to show love for others? If the Torah says that love your neighbor as yourself is at the core of the Torah, how do we learn to love the neighbor? And he suggests, interestingly enough, that we learn to love our neighbor by practicing loving the stranger. That loving the stranger is the core, I would call it the core practice that teaches us how to see fellow human beings. So let me show you what I mean. We're going to go through this a couple lines at a time, and we'll see if we understand anything that he says together. So Cohen writes, and he wrote this in German, but this is Simon Kaplan's translation. From the notion of the stranger, we have already learned that monotheism began with human love. Yes, Sarah, I can share the source sheet at the end. Monotheism begins with human love, he says. And the Hebrew word for human love here, sorry, the German word for human love is one that some of us might recognize from Yiddish. Menschenliebe. Liebe sounds like love, right? Menschen, the Yiddish word mensch, like we call somebody a mensch. Mensch actually just means human being. I mean, that literally means man, right? So it means that in Yiddish and it means that in German as well. So Menschenliebe is love of humans. He says that's where monotheism begins. That's a really interesting statement, isn't it? We would have thought that monotheism begins from knowing and believing in the one God. We would have thought that monotheism begins in the heavens, right? I'm having trouble saying that word today. Monotheism begins from God. Cohen says no. Monotheism begins from Menschenliebe. It begins from our ability to love fellow humans. He goes on to say the legislation for the stranger showed us the way to the historical sources of the love of one's neighbor, which is what I was saying before. Loving the stranger came first, and loving the stranger has to be legislated. We're more likely to love our neighbors, right? Maybe not our literal neighbors, but maybe our literal neighbors. They're close to us. They live in the same city. They probably share our basic values, probably because they're part of the same society as us. We're more likely to love people who are closer to us. But Cohen says that loving the stranger has to be legislated, and it showed us the way to loving the neighbor. Because in the stranger, he says, the fellow man was discovered. And here again, I think the German is important. Fellow man, Mitmensch. Mit in German is with. So Mitmensch is the person with me, the one who is either physically or with me in my humanity. In the stranger, we must discover the Mitmensch, the person that is like us. And all the more so, he says, pity arose first with regard to the stranger. So this word, I want to talk about this word pity right here. In German, Mitleid. Do we have any German speakers in the room with us today? Any German speakers? Bob says a little. Bob, do you know what the word Leid means? Leid means in German? If not, that's totally fine. But if you do, then feel free to tell us.
Love.
No, actually, good guess. That's Liebe, right? Liebe is
Oh,
love.
right.
Leid actually
Oh,
means suffering or pain in German. So when you say I'm sorry in German, you say es tut mir leid, which literally means it causes me suffering. That's how you say sorry in German. It causes me suffering. So what is Mitleid? Mitleid means suffering along with. Mit is with and Leid is suffering. Pity here. Pity is not, we use the word pity in English to mean something different. He is talking about Mitleid being our ability to suffer along with somebody. How does Mitleid help us learn how to love the stranger? How is Mitleid a route to loving our fellow human being? Go ahead, Bob.
I'm reminded of all the years I spent hanging around with toddlers, and it's a very interesting process that if kids are playing with each other in the sandbox and they're kind of used to that, then the minute one of them falls down or gets hurt or is upset because some kid took their toy, there's crying, and there's usually then somebody comes over and gives them their toy or gives them a hug or something. And so it seems like that's the very seed of when human beings as children begin to see that that a stranger also is important and can therefore turn into that kind of like fellow
Hmm.
simply by being in the sandbox.
Yeah, and by seeing somebody else suffer, right? And maybe, as Cohen suggests here, that's because we recognize their suffering in ourselves, right? We see them as a fellow human when we see someone else suffering. I see Sarah and then Jan.
For me, it's about compassion and empathy. That when indeed, as you're saying, we can be with another, we know our own suffering and we care enough about the other to show them that love and withness.
Yes, I love that witness, right? That when we put ourselves with another person, then we see their humanity versus seeing an other. And that may be what our society is missing right now so much, is the ability to see the humanity and care about the suffering of the one that we've decided is other. Jan, go ahead, and then Aviva and Yehuda.
Yes, a couple of the words that you've been using here. You put yourself in somebody else's shoes, but to me, I was told you're born with empathy, and we learn to suppress it. But you look at a bunch of babies in the nursery, and one cries, and they all cry. And why would they all cry? Only one is uncomfortable, because there's a sense of empathy already with all when they're born, and we tend to learn to put that down and to suppress it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's and we do have to practice it, right? And that somebody was saying that at the very beginning, right? That empathy, mitleid, loving the stranger is actually a practice. It's something that we have to work on, which I think that's exactly what Cohen is suggesting here. That's why it had to be legislated. It's something that maybe we're born with it, but we teach ourselves otherwise, and so it has to be legislated. But the more we do it, the more we discover the human being that is with us. Aviva and Yehuda, and then Bob.
I think we have to take on something that's one of the more difficult parts of this that comes up over and over again, many times, where it says, remember you were strangers in Egypt, which has a lot of intimations in it. It says, when you remember that you were a stranger in Egypt, does that mean that you did not feel loved when you were in Egypt because you were a slave or for whatever reason, and that you wanted to feel loved? I think it never actually gets explained anywhere in the Torah, but it always reminds you of that. So there's a historical memory that goes with every time it comes up. And yet it doesn't take on the difficulty of what does that mean, that to remember this historical background.
Right. Yeah, I mean, how long do you have, right? We could spend the next hour on that. But what I'll say about it in the last minute we have left, and then I'll give Bob a chance to speak as well, is that I think the danger of the historical reason for, loving your neighbor is that we can forget it easily, right? We who have suffered can cause other people to suffer. In fact, there's a well-known saying in psychology that hurt people, right? Does having been hurt make me more likely to love my neighbor, or does the trauma that I hold make me actually more likely to hurt other people? Right? So it's a dangerous hook to hang our society on. Remember that you were a stranger in Egypt, even though it is a powerful message at the same time. I know I'm not exactly answering your question, Yehuda, but I think that some of what Cohen's getting at here is that in the end, what we need to do is practice seeing and caring about the suffering of the other, because then we will see ourselves as fellow human beings. Bob, you get the last word here.
Well, I'm just thinking that, the legislation that we need is what it kind of helps us make the jump from pity to empathy. I think it also is the way that um, we enlarge our sense of a sandbox to include community, to include others, to include the world. That without that, we need some kind of a jump. Otherwise, we're still stuck just caring about people that we know.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate that. And so, so where is the hope in all this? Uh, for me, the hope is, for me, it's found in the idea that our capacity, our means to repair the world and to repair society is actually right within us. That all we have to do is practice caring about other people's suffering. And that is the beginning of everything, as far as Cohen suggests. It's the beginning of, caring about humans, the beginning of loving your neighbor, and ultimately the beginning of monotheism. If monotheism is the idea that God cares about how we treat one another, we discover that when we practice caring about the suffering of others. And there may be no more important thing that we can do than to try to see and hear and care about the suffering, even of others whose suffering we would rather not hear about, whether they be because they're on the other side of the border, or because they're on the other side of the political spectrum, or because we see them as aggressors, or for whatever reason, right? Just start by caring. You don't have to excuse somebody's behavior. Just start by caring. So with that, we'll end. Next week, we are meeting with Rabbi Jeremy Schneider for something lighter. It's called Laughter and Light, Finding Hope Through Jewish Humor. It's like the opposite of what we did today, right? So I look forward to sharing that with all of you next week. Thank you for being part of this discussion today, and an early Shabbat Shalom. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.